Cindy James was the kind of woman most people would have overlooked in the rush of everyday life. She was quiet, graceful in her demeanor, someone who lived without the hunger for attention that defined so many others. To her family, to her friends, she was thoughtful, steady, grounded. She had a career as a nurse, she loved helping children, and she was rebuilding her life after a separation from her husband. Nothing about her seemed like the foundation for a nightmare. But beneath the surface of that ordinary life, something sinister was waiting, and it would soon consume her in ways too chilling to imagine. The terror began small, the kind of small that people could almost brush off, the kind of small that might feel like a trick of the imagination. It started with phone calls. The line would ring, and when Cindy answered, she was met with silence. Sometimes there was a whisper, sometimes heavy breathing, sometimes an eerie click as the call cut off. At first, Cindy thought it might be a wrong number, some teenager playing pranks. But the calls did not stop. They grew in frequency, in intensity. And soon, the silence on the other end felt less like a prank, and more like a predator watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to step closer. It wasn't long before other strange things began happening. She would come home and find threatening notes tucked under her windshield wipers, sometimes crudely scrawled, sometimes marked with words designed to frighten. Her windows were smashed. Lights in her house were tampered with. Her phone line would go dead at the very moments she needed it most. On more than one occasion, her beloved dog was found tied up outside, distressed, as if someone had deliberately targeted the creature she loved most. The escalation was undeniable. This wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't her imagination. Someone out there wanted Cindy to be afraid, someone who seemed to enjoy the steady drip of terror, the way her life was unraveling piece by piece. And when the calls and threats became too much, Cindy turned to the only place she thought could protect her, the police. But even there, she found no safe harbor. To the investigators, the case felt strange, too elaborate, too inconsistent. Who would stalk a woman so persistently, leaving behind so little evidence of who they were? Some officers whispered that perhaps Cindy was making it up. Perhaps the strain of her divorce, her quiet, private personality, her loneliness, had fractured something inside her. But others looked at her eyes, at the bruises, at the notes, and could not shake the conviction that something dark was circling her life. For Cindy, the horror was real. Each new incident was like a fingerprint pressed into her daily existence, each threat a reminder that she was never truly alone. The phone calls returned, sometimes dozens in a single night. The silence on the line was suffocating. Sometimes a distorted voice hissed words that froze her blood. Other times, there was a low laugh that suggested whoever was on the other end enjoyed every second of her suffering. The incidents grew bolder. Cindy would discover objects in her home had been moved. Her clothes were slashed. And then there were the more terrifying discoveries. A note nailed to her front door, warning her she would die. Rope left in her yard, as though someone was sending her a message of what was to come. These were not the signs of a mind simply unraveling. They were deliberate, calculated acts meant to torment her. But the most horrifying thing was the sense that her stalker, if it was truly one person, was always close. Too close. It wasn't just the phone calls anymore. Neighbors would later recall seeing strange figures lurking near Cindy's home. A shadow by the fence. A figure ducking behind a tree. Footsteps on gravel where no one should have been. Cindy herself began to feel eyes on her constantly, whether she was at work, in her car, or walking into her home at night. Fear had become the air she breathed. And yet, despite everything, the world around her seemed to move on as though nothing was wrong. Friends worried, yes. Family checked in. But the official narrative, the one whispered among law enforcement, was that Cindy might be imagining some of it, or even staging the events herself. This left her more isolated than ever, trapped between two terrifying realities. Either someone was truly hunting her and no one believed it, or she was spiraling into madness, and no one could save her from herself. The first major escalation came when Cindy was discovered bound, with nylon stockings tied tightly around her limbs, bruises across her body, and no clear memory of how it had happened. She told authorities that someone had attacked her, drugged her, left her for dead. But investigators raised their eyebrows. There were no clear signs of forced entry. No fingerprints, no clues left behind. How could a stalker repeatedly invade her home, assault her, and vanish without a trace? Still, the evidence of her injuries was undeniable. The marks on her wrists, the cuts on her body, the terror in her voice. Something was happening to Cindy James, something that went far beyond prank calls or mischief. Whether real or imagined, her suffering was undeniable, and it was only getting worse. By now, Cindy was calling 911 so often that her name had become familiar to dispatchers. The sound of her voice, trembling, strained, became a staple of their shifts. Each call carried a note of desperation. Sometimes she reported seeing someone outside her window. Sometimes she reported noises, breaking glass, shadows moving across her lawn. Other times she spoke of threats left behind, notes, calls, and the sensation of being followed in her car. Always the same fear, always the same certainty, someone wanted her dead. Her life became a maze of fear. She changed her locks repeatedly. She moved houses. She painted her car a different color. She even changed her last name in an effort to escape the stalker who seemed to know her every move. But the terror followed, adapting, mutating, finding her wherever she tried to hide. Friends later described how Cindy's personality began to shift under the weight of constant harassment. Once warm and gentle, she became withdrawn, nervous, and on edge. Every sound was a potential threat, every stranger a possible suspect. She spoke often of her fear that no one truly believed her, that the police were only waiting for her to crack under the pressure so they could dismiss her entirely. The effect on her health was catastrophic. Sleep became a stranger. Anxiety gnawed at her every waking hour. She developed ulcers, lost weight, and began to seek counselors in an effort to manage her fear. But even therapy could not erase the fact that the terror was not just inside her mind. The bruises, the notes, the broken windows, these were tangible. Someone, somewhere, was orchestrating a campaign of horror against Cindy James. And yet, the question lingered, like a shadow no light could banish. Was this the work of a sadistic stalker, or was Cindy somehow constructing her own nightmare? The lack of definitive proof meant that every incident became another wedge of doubt. And as the years passed, the incidents grew not just stranger, but deadlier. Part 1 closes in that uneasy limbo. Cindy James, once an ordinary woman, had become the center of a chilling mystery. Her life was unraveling, one 911 call at a time, as she tried to convince the world of a terror that seemed invisible to everyone but her. By the late 1980s, she was a woman consumed, haunted by threats, hunted by shadows, unsure whether her greatest enemy was an external force or her own mind. But what no one realized was that the nightmare was only just beginning. The calls, the threats, the bruises, those were only preludes. Because the final chapters of Cindy James's life would push this case from disturbing to terrifying, leaving behind questions that still remain unanswered to this day. The attacks on Cindy James did not stop. If anything, they grew bolder, more sinister, and far more personal. It was no longer just the occasional phone call filled with silence, or a crude whisper on the other end. Now, she was being stalked by something, or someone, that wanted her to live in fear every single second of her life. Late at night, she would return home to find her lights unscrewed, her doors left open, windows she knew she had locked earlier now slightly ajar. Furniture would be moved, photographs shifted, and strange notes, sometimes simple scrawls of threats, would appear on her doorstep or taped to her car. The handwriting was crude, shaky, but what chilled her most was how familiar it often seemed. As if the stalker wasn't a stranger, but someone close, someone who knew her better than she wanted to admit. One night, she discovered her dog trembling in the backyard, its fur matted with blood where someone had cut it. The animal survived, but it was clear, whoever was tormenting Cindy wanted her to know that no one was safe, not even the things she loved. Police grew frustrated. They responded dozens of times, but every time they searched, there was nothing concrete. No footprints, no fingerprints, no trace of anyone. The calls couldn't be traced. And the neighbors, despite hearing some noises, never saw anything definitive. It was as if the perpetrator melted into the air itself. But Cindy knew better. She felt eyes on her constantly. At the grocery store, walking to her car, even while simply drawing the blinds. That suffocating sensation of being watched became her daily existence. Her paranoia wasn't irrational, it was survival. Then came the physical assaults. She was found by friends and neighbors with nylon stockings tied tightly around her neck, sometimes too tightly for her to have tied herself. Bruises covered her arms and legs, her skin scraped raw from being dragged. On one occasion, she was discovered near unconscious in a ditch, her shoes missing, a man's work boot print pressed faintly into the mud beside her. When she tried to tell investigators what was happening, doubt seeped in. Her stories seemed too dramatic, too frequent, too impossible. Some officers began to whisper among themselves, was Cindy staging these attacks? Could it be self-inflicted? The cruelest suggestion of all was whispered behind closed doors, maybe Cindy James was losing her mind. But the evidence, it painted a different picture. Cindy's phone lines had been cut multiple times. Her garage had been broken into. Nylon stockings, always the same method of strangulation, kept appearing. Who stages their own assaults to the point of near death? Who risks their life just for attention? The inconsistencies weren't in Cindy's behavior, they were in the world around her. Still, the doubts crushed her. She began journaling everything, every sound, every movement, every incident, as if writing the truth on paper would one day prove that she wasn't imagining it. Her journal entries were haunting. Phrases like, "They want me dead," and "I don't know how much longer I can survive," repeated like a chorus of despair. Her words weren't dramatic. They were resigned, tired, afraid. The more the police dismissed her, the more isolated she became. Her family worried, her friends pitied her, but no one could offer real protection. She began staying at different houses, constantly moving, constantly searching for safety that never came. And then came the most chilling incident yet. Cindy was found, unconscious, in her own car. Her hands and feet were tied. A nylon stocking, again, was around her throat. And stabbed into her hand was a needle, traces of an unknown sedative in her bloodstream. Whoever was stalking her didn't just want her to fear death anymore, they wanted her to experience it slowly. The nightmare wasn't letting go. It was tightening its grip, suffocating her world. Cindy James wasn't just a victim. She was being hunted, methodically, relentlessly. And yet, the most horrifying part wasn't the attacks themselves. It was the fact that everyone around her was beginning to question whether the predator was real, or whether Cindy herself had become the monster in her own story. Cindy James lived in the shadow of something invisible, something that consumed her entire existence. Fear was no longer a fleeting emotion, it was the air she breathed. Every creak of a floorboard, every shadow shifting across the window, every anonymous ring of the phone drove her further into a state of exhaustion that no rest could cure. And yet, despite it all, she endured. Until she couldn't. By 1989, Cindy's torment had stretched on for nearly 7 years. 7 years of phone calls, cut wires, threatening notes, mutilated pets, and brutal assaults. 7 years of being disbelieved, whispered about, and judged by strangers and even by those closest to her. Some police investigators insisted she was fabricating everything, others quietly admitted that the evidence pointed to something far more sinister. Her life had become a theater of horror, but one with an audience that couldn't decide whether they were watching a tragedy, or a performance. She tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. She sold her house, moved into a new one, and even hired a private investigator for protection. For a time, there were lulls in the attacks, short stretches of calm that allowed her to hope the nightmare might finally be fading. But those moments never lasted. The calm always gave way to another storm, and the storms were worsening. Cindy would be found semi-conscious, nylon stockings biting into her throat, bruises decorating her arms, her ankles raw from bindings. Her car, on more than one occasion, was vandalized. At times, she claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking nearby, watching her, waiting. Her friends began to sense that something final was approaching. Cindy was reaching her breaking point. Her journal during these final months was especially grim. She wrote of constant dread, of knowing she would not survive much longer. The entries were not the scribblings of someone seeking attention, they were the farewell notes of a person already preparing for her end. Her words had the chilling certainty of a death sentence already signed: "They will kill me. It is only a matter of time." Then, in May of 1989, Cindy disappeared. Her car was found parked in the lot of a local shopping center, not far from where she lived. Inside were groceries she had purchased earlier, still neatly packed. Her wallet, credit cards, and belongings were there, untouched. But there was no sign of Cindy. 2 weeks passed. 2 agonizing weeks of silence. Search parties combed through parks, rivers, and woods. Police followed leads, questioned those closest to her, and once again found themselves torn between 2 impossible explanations. Was Cindy James the victim of a relentless predator, or had she staged her own disappearance? On June 8, the search ended. Cindy's body was discovered lying in the yard of an abandoned house, not far from where her car had been left. She was fully clothed, her hands and feet bound behind her back, a nylon stocking tightly wound around her neck. It was the same chilling method that had haunted her for years. But the most disturbing detail came from the autopsy. Cindy had not died quickly. The medical examiner determined she had died slowly, strangled by the stocking. And in her system were traces of morphine and other drugs, enough to weaken her, but not enough to kill her outright. She had been sedated, restrained, and then deliberately suffocated. The scene should have screamed homicide. A woman tied up, drugged, and strangled, dumped in the yard of an abandoned house. Yet once again, doubt crept in. Some investigators argued that Cindy had orchestrated her own death, that somehow she had bound herself, injected the drugs, and staged the entire scene. To them, it was the culmination of years of attention-seeking behavior, a final act of self-destruction. But others looked at the facts and saw something far darker. The bindings were tight, awkward, and unlikely to have been self-inflicted. The drugs in her system pointed to someone else's involvement. And the years of documented attacks, the phone calls, the threats, the cut wires, the animal cruelty, painted a chilling picture of a woman relentlessly stalked until her body could no longer endure. Her death was officially ruled not suicide, not an accident. The file remained in limbo. No arrests were ever made. No one was charged. Cindy James's death, like her life, became a mystery wrapped in fear, skepticism, and unanswered questions. But the horror of her story lies not just in her death, it lies in the silence that followed. For years, she cried out for help. She documented the torment in meticulous detail. She lived with bruises, cuts, and near-fatal assaults that begged for belief. Yet she was doubted, dismissed, and sometimes ridiculed. Whether her killer was real or imagined, whether Cindy was the victim of an external predator or the prison of her own mind, the system around her failed. Her body told the truth of her suffering. Her journals told the truth of her fear. But the truth about who, or what, destroyed Cindy James has never been uncovered. And perhaps that is what makes her story so terrifying. Because if Cindy was murdered, then her killer was a phantom capable of slipping through every crack of justice, a figure who stalked, tortured, and eventually killed without ever leaving a trace. Someone who might have been watching her every move, standing just beyond the shadows, closer than anyone suspected. And if Cindy fabricated it all, if her mind conjured an enemy so convincingly that even her own body bore the scars, then the terror is no less real. For what fate is more horrifying than being your own predator, hunted by the darkness inside you, dragged into a nightmare that no one else believes? The final image remains the same, Cindy James, bound, silenced, and left alone in the cold grass of an abandoned yard. A woman who warned again and again that she was going to die. A woman who said her tormentors were closing in. A woman who was, in the end, proven right. The unanswered question still lingers like a phantom in the air. Was Cindy James the victim of a sadistic killer who never got caught, or was she the victim of something far more insidious, something we may never fully understand? In either case, Cindy's story doesn't end with her death. It endures in the chilling silence that follows when the world refuses